I once asked Noreen why she got divorced. She said it was because she wasn't happy. Are you happy now? I asked. No, she said. I'm still unhappy, but in a different way. 5. The voice on the other end says it's Mr. Devlin's office calling, and at first I think it's a joke. Everyone has told me that Jeremiah Devlin never returns phone calls. What can I do for you, Mr. Devlin? I ask. He'd like to talk to you. Hold on, please. I wait a few seconds, and then another voice enters my ear. A voice that's even and strong and obviously in command. This is Jeremiah Devlin. I thank him for returning my call and tell him I'd like to talk about Megan Wright. He says she was a fine girl. What happened was a tragedy. I say I have some questions if he may not like, but problems have arisen. Loose ends that need to be tied together. It's my job to resolve these things. He tells me to go ahead. How well do you know Megan's mother? I don't discuss matters of that nature. But you know her. You have some kind of relationship with her? It would not be untrue to say that. My neck and shoulder hurt from the way I'm holding the phone. The call surprised me. I didn't have time to assemble my headset. How did your son get along with Megan? Quite well, I thought. They're both young. They like the same music, movies, TV shows. I think most of it is trash, personally. Did Brad see Megan the night she was killed? No. He was with me in Tahoe. That's not what the police tell me. The police don't know all the facts, nor do you. Brad's name has been mentioned during the investigation. The police say they want to question him, but he seems to have dropped out of sight. I wait for the phone to be slammed down. I'm late for a meeting, Jeremiah Devlin says. Come to my office this afternoon, around 4. I try to think of a way to get there. Traffic is always bad at that time of day. As I head out of the door, Rebecca rushes up and says she was down at the surf shop and Megan's father has been fired, of course. But on a hunch, she brought along a picture of Jeremiah Devlin. She showed it to the girl behind the counter and asked if she had ever seen this man. The girl squinted at the photo and held it in her hands and finally said, yes, he did look familiar. In fact, she remembers seeing him at the store a few times, and she was always impressed because he looked so distinguished and stuff. He'd walked into the store and looked over the jams and the wetsuits, and Megan's father would go up to him and ask if he needed help. The two of them would talk in low tones right near the boogie boards, although a couple of times they used the office in the back. Jeremiah Devlin's office is in an industrial park just off a freeway in the valley. I expected something better. His secretary tells me to wait. She asks if I'd like a cup of coffee or a glass of water. I decline. I notice an enlarged frame photo on the wall. It shows a lot of scrubland with mountains rising in the background. California before the sprawl. Mr. Lowe. I turn around. Jeremiah Devlin. The man before me is tall and slender, with the kind of tight skin that's gained either through physical training or plastic surgery. He looks a few years shy of 50. I shake his hand and thank him for inviting me. Let's talk in my office, he says. We enter a room that's wide and deep and dark. I like the dimness of it, the feeling that I'm in shadows. On the wood-paneled walls are 18th century paintings depicting various aspects of the hunt. In one, the hound clenches a blood-soaked goose in its jaws. Devlin asks why I was so intrigued by the picture on the wall in the lobby. I say I'm not sure. I just like old photos. He says it was taken by his father the day he broke ground on this plant. Everyone said he was crazy to build it so far out in the valley. But the land was cheap and he had a vision, and the operation kept expanding until the firm became the largest of its kind in the world. I ask if he ever gets concerned about going out of business. As long as war is in health of the state, we'll never have any worries. That's off the record. Are you diversifying? We have our fingers in many pies. He stops at his desk and says he wants to introduce a couple of people. The first is Morgan Osborne, his personal attorney. The second is his son Brad. Osborne looks pasty, pudgy, confrontational. I remember Brad from the funeral. The police maintain they want to talk to my son, but can't find him. As you can see, locating Brad is a very difficult task. I found myself smiling. Devlin sits behind his desk and leans back in his chair. Ask us anything, he says. I take out my tape recorder and say I hope they don't mind, but I like to do this for important interviews, and I'm sure they can understand. Osborne says he certainly can, and takes out his own tape recorder and puts it next to mine. We all laugh. Brad, I ask, where were you the night Megan was killed? Is Brad a suspect? Osborne asks. As far as I'm concerned, everyone is guilty until proven innocent. I wish the police were that straightforward, Jeremiah Devlin says. I was in Tahoe with my father, Brad tells me. Sometimes I go with him on his trips. The police say you went over to Megan's house that night. They saw the two of you left together. I was in Tahoe. I talked to the girl who gave the eulogy at Megan's funeral, I say. I think her name is Alexis? Brad nods. I decide to make my next statement more definite than it really is. I want to see how he'll react. She says she was at Megan's house the day she died. I wouldn't know. I was in Tahoe. She says you and some of your friends were there too. I was in Tahoe. Then why did she say those things, Brad? She's confused, he says. She's always confused. What do you mean? I don't want to say anything. I was in Tahoe. He looks down at his feet before turning to Osborne, as if he were an actor who's forgotten his lines. Maybe we can make this off the record, Osborne says. I make a motion that could be construed as assent. She uses drugs, man. She's in the fucking cloud most of the time. Be careful with your language, Brad, Jeremiah Devlin says. I glance up from my notepad. Father and son never seem to look at each other. I told Megan not to hang out with her, Brad says. She knows some guys. I hope Megan never met them, but maybe she did. Maybe that's why. What kind of guys, Brad? Bad guys? Bad news? Like Grant Fisher? Do you know him? We've met. He's the worst. I wouldn't be surprised if he... Osborne interjects. I believe we've entered an area in which it's best for my client to remain silent. That may be true, I say, but it's not the best for me. Jeremiah Devlin smiles, showing bright, wide, even teeth, easily the whitest thing in the room, but his eyes remain narrow and focused in this light. They look gray. What did you do in Tahoe, Brad? Water skiing. It's great. Really on the edge. He sat in on some meetings, too, Jeremiah Devlin says. I'm trying to teach him my business. Some exercises are more productive than others. I suppose you can verify all this. You can check his academic records. Brad attends Hillard School. He wasn't in that day. Or you can talk to any of my managers in Tahoe. I make some notes and hope they think I'm just catching up. Truth is, I've run out of questions. I was unprepared for a solid alibi. What does Megan's mother do for a living, I ask. I feel like a fisherman casting out a line, hoping, despite the horrific odds, that this time he'll catch something. This isn't about her, Devlin says. It's about Brad and his whereabouts the night Megan was killed. Sometimes, I tell myself, you do land a fish. Megan's mother recently bought an expensive home in a gated community, I say. I'm looking at my notebook as if I have this written down. I hope no one can see that the page is blank. She also enrolled her children in private schools. I've met her ex-husband, and he's not the kind of guy who could support them that way. She never got a dime from him, Devlin tells me. Megan's mother could not have said it more bitterly. So, what happened? I ask. Devlin leans in forward in his chair. I haven't had a stare down like this since 6th grade. I feel my heart racing and my breath getting shallow. I think of what Brad said about water skiing. She threw you out when you asked about me, Jeremiah Devlin says. You can throw me out too. It's your office. Devlin leans back in his chair and looks up at the ceiling. She works for me. More accurately, she works for my primary company. She's an outstanding manager. Last year, she reduced her division's workforce by 10% while increasing its production and profitability. I gave her a substantial bonus. I believe she used that money to put a down payment on the house. She told me she got home late the night Megan died, I say, but she wasn't with you, so where was she? Probably at work. Do you know much about her? I have to shake my head. Her husband deserted her. She raised 2 children by herself and got an MBA by Pomona College at night. She's an admirable woman. A lot of people in this country no longer respect hard work and discipline, but I sure as hell do. Brad pipes up. I'm surprised to hear his voice. I think we all are. This no longer seems about him. I have an idea, he says. I think the police got the days mixed up. I went over to Megan's the night before I went to Tahoe. We hung out together. Alexis was there too. I know, she got the days mixed up. Did you do that a lot? I ask. Hang out with Megan? Brad looks at the lawyer before answering. Sometimes. Not a lot. She was neat. It's a shame what happened. Did Megan ever go up to Tahoe? I ask. I'm fly fishing now. Devlin shakes his head. He says Tahoe is a special place for him. He's zealous about his privacy, and that's his most private of places. Not even Megan's mother has been there. Why are you making a point of that, I ask. I wasn't aware I was making a point about anything. You seem to be saying something about your relationship with Mrs. Wright. I'm wondering what it is. I notice Devlin glancing at Osborne, who nods imperceptibly. Let me put it to you this way, Devlin says. I care about what happens to Megan's mother. I care very deeply. How did you get up to Tahoe? I ask Brad. I hope shifting gears so abruptly would get him to say something I can use, but his father answers instead. He flew up with me on a company plane, Devlin says. And when did you come back? When we heard about Megan. You came back together. Devlin and his son look at each other for the first time since the interview began. I don't recall, Devlin says. It's all a blur. Brad may have returned before me. I honestly don't remember. I was quite upset. I can still see the insects covering her body. I can still hear her whine and buzz. Their whine and buzz. We all feel Megan's death, Jeremiah Devlin says. We're all grieving deeply. But I want to say something, and I want you to print it. He gets up from behind his desk. I feel like telling him there are no guarantees. Brad has been the object of rumor and innuendo. I've heard these things. We've all heard them, but nobody has come forward with proof because there is none. Brad was with me that night. His voice rises as his fist slams on the desk. I want to tell him that I hate scenes. I resent this gossip. I resent this shit. Brad crosses his legs and clasps his hands behind his neck. His eyes are fixed on the indeterminate point between the ceiling and the end of his nose. Osborne doodles on a piece of legal paper. Brad is no more responsible for Megan's death than anybody else in this room. The police have to realize that. They're no closer to making an arrest now than they were the day her body was found, and they won't make an arrest until they shift the focus of their investigation. I can guarantee that. I snap off my tape recorder and thank them for their time. My deadline is approaching. Jeremiah Devlin walks to the door with me. You've discussed all this with Megan's mother, I say. This is more of a statement than a question. He nods. She understands the situation. It's been difficult for her. He lowers his voice. My son, he tells me, I have great plans for him. High hopes. I can see that. It almost seems as if someone is trying to set him up, but I'll crush anyone who harms him. I put my notepad in my jacket and for the first time look directly at Jeremiah Devlin. There are a few small, faint scars on his face, as if he's cut himself shaving. I point to my own neck, which has similar marks. No offense, Mr. Devlin, but can't you afford a better razor than the kind I use? He displays his teeth again and says, It's a perennial condition. I have sensitive skin. So you don't go to the beach much. He shakes his head. That's strange, I say. I tell him that he's been to the surf shop talking to Megan's father. I haven't been to a place like that since I was 20, he says. I used to spend my summers in the South Bay. That was before we learned about melanoma. My editor says she needs the story fast for the first edition. We can make it better later. I ask Rebecca to transcribe the tape while I start writing. Gruley isn't in his office. He's not at home either. I leave holes in the places where I expect him to help me. My editor says she has to have the story. Rebecca sends me a message saying the stuff on the tape is fantastic. I try Gruley's office again. The woman who answers the phone says she's not going to beep him for me, and she has no idea where he is. He could be on a case. He could be stuck in traffic. He could be at a bar or a ball game, or I ask what his favorite bar is. After she tells me, I call information, then hit #0 and get through the number. I ask if Frank Gruley is there. The guy who answers says he isn't sure. He'll have to look. I promise I'm not calling on the behalf of the detective's wife. I think I hear him laugh. Gruley asks how I found him. I tell him it's my fucking job to find him when I have to. I recount the interview with Jeremiah Devlin as quickly as I can. Off the record, Gruley says. What they're telling you is complete bullshit. They say they can prove it. If you get enough people to lie, you can prove anything. I tell him I need something I can print. I work for a family newspaper, and the term complete bullshit, while descriptive, won't get past the desk. Detective Frank Gruley clears his throat. His voice assumes the official tone used by public servants at press briefings as he says the investigation is serious and ongoing. The police are pursuing every lead. He's sorry if feathers are being ruffled, but that's the nature of the business. I ask if Brad Devlin is a suspect. What follows is a long pause, interrupted by deep, rhythmic breathing. I shouldn't be telling you this, Gruley finally says. Tell me, oh please, God, tell me. But, yes, he is. I type in his comments and ask Rebecca to double check the quotes from Jeremiah Devlin. She says they're right on the money, so I send the story over. My editor says she likes it. The piece has guts, it's strong, it's the best thing we've put on page 1 in a long time. But it's missing something. She sits at her screen, moving the cursor around like a sports car weaving through traffic. She wears wire-frame glasses. Her name is Trish Yamamoto, and she was only recently promoted to the Metro desk from one of the suburban bureaus. She stops the cursor near the top of the story. It's here. What's where? She says I need something from the lawyer. I've just quoted my unnamed police friend, but there's no reaction from Brad's attorney. The story is good and everything's supported, but we have to be careful. Jeremiah Devlin is a powerful man. Rebecca finishes transcribing the tape and sends it to my queue, and asks if there is anything else she can do. I tell her to stick around. I might need her for something. When I call Osborne, I say I'm sorry to bother him at home, but I've been talking to the police, and one well-placed source in the investigation has informed me that Brad is definitely a suspect. I look at the clock. We're already past deadline. I ask if he has any comment. Osborne says he can't believe the police have nothing better to do than smear a fine young man who couldn't possibly have committed the crime. It's enough to shake one's faith in law enforcement. For the record, I say, you're stating that Brad is innocent? Let me phrase it this way, the lawyer says. Brad played no role in this unfortunate occurrence. I insert what he says. Trish claims that should do it. She likes what I've done. I say goodnight and lock my desk. On my way out, Rebecca says I look like a guy who could use a beer. We have a drink at a place near work, and then we eat Chinese. Rebecca loves Mushu. I think she's about going home, but Rebecca says she knows a good bar at the beach where sometimes they have a band. The group plays Motown covers. We dance a bit. It occurs to me that the originals came out before she was born. She lives close by and asks if I'd like to stop in for one more. Her apartment is on the second floor, and I tell her I would have declined the offer if I'd known stairs were involved. She says I'm a lazy bum, and I say no, I'm just getting old. She says she doesn't believe me. On her way up, I can see the ocean and hear the waves, and I say it must be nice to live here, and she says it is. She grew up in the desert, but she always dreamed of living near the water because it seems so peaceful. And now here she is, and it's really strange how things can work out just the way you hoped.